right, good morning. I was told there'd be no break, but it looks like we lost a few bodies here in the audience. Hopefully they'll come back, but I know we're a little behind, so I will keep us going. I know that'll make Melissa and our friends at Gates happy. But this is a really exciting conversation. My name is Alessi. I'm with an organization called Empower Schools, and here to talk to you this morning and with you guys and with our panelists about the school's unit of change, which really, as you know, is a huge fundamental shift. Moving from a school system to a system of schools with educators like these at the center is a big deal and a big shift. So we're excited to dive into that today. In this panel, we're going to explore what's enabling school leaders to move in this direction and also what's holding them back, and how is the system adapting or not to support them and also hold them accountable. So just like the last panel, I'm going to ask a few questions, and then I'm going to turn it back over to you guys. So hopefully in the next little bit, you guys can be thinking of questions you have in your head. And before we start, I was also asked to do brief intros before I start grilling them with questions. So bear with me here. I'm going to do some brief intros. We have Brandi Chin, who's here with us. She's the founding school director of DSST Middle School at Noel, a new campus she's preparing to open in the fall of 2018. DSST's charter schools are consistently among the top performing and most in-demand campuses in Denver. And as a network, they're currently serving 5,300 students across 13 schools in Denver. We have Christine DeLeon, who founded Moonshot edVentures 2 years ago with the mission to surface and support diverse leaders to design and launch the schools of tomorrow. 11 of the 16 fellows in their inaugural cohort identify as leaders of color. And if you know any really strong up-and-coming school leaders, let Christine know after the panel because their cohort 2 applications are due later this month. Of course. And then Kurt Dennis is the executive principal of McAuliffe International and Manual Schools, co-located innovation schools in DPS. Kurt's one of only 2 school leaders in the district with experience and success leading multiple campuses. You heard from Alex earlier today, Magana, one of the others. And Kurt, along with 7 other Denver school leaders, have been participating in something called the EdLead Fellowship, which actually we and our partners, Bellwether Education, as well as DPS, are piloting this year to help Denver school leaders of all governance types increase and expand the number of high-quality seats in Denver. And then finally, we have Scott Wolf, the principal of North High School, a traditional DPS school that's got significant increases in enrollment and better outcomes for students over the past recent years, in the most recent years. So thanks to all of you in advance for participating and engaging with us in this important conversation. So I'm going to start with Kurt, actually, and I'm going to throw a few questions at you, Kurt, okay. And you can answer them sort of however you think makes sense. And I think I'm going to start with the version of the question we had earlier that Alex talked about, which is you opened McAuliffe a few years ago as an innovation school, and so why did you and your staff believe that was important, and how did that help you serve your students better? And then you recently submitted an innovation zone application for your 2 schools and 2 other IB schools in Northeast Denver. Mm-hmm. Why did you feel like it was necessary to take that additional step of forming a zone with independent governance, and how do you think a zone will help the 4 schools serve them better? So give us kind of evolution of sort of, how you first took that step to go innovation, now why you're taking the next step, and what that means for your students.
Sure. Thank you, Brett. So I think if you're going to talk about my evolution or our evolution as a leadership team, I think we have to start where I started as a leader, which was in a traditional district in the state of Colorado. I was a school leader for 4 years and had a very different experience than what I'm currently experiencing here in Denver Public Schools. Working in a traditional school district as a traditional school leader, to be quite honest with you, I found very disheartening and very disempowering. I felt like I was a middle manager because I was a middle manager. What we taught in my school, professional development that was offered, how I treated my teachers, was all dictated from the folks that worked at central administration. And while those people were well-intended, they didn't know my kids, they didn't know my community, they didn't know my staff in the way that I did. And so I think that, when I came to Denver Public Schools 7 years ago, the biggest aha for me was this culture of empowerment and a culture of trust that I had never experienced before. And I recognize that takes a lot of courage on the part of district leadership to recognize that you can't manage everything that happens in a district with 90,000 students and over 200 schools from a central location in downtown Denver, that there has to be a level of trust and empowerment of school leaders in order to do this work well and to best serve kids and communities. And so when I began to experience that as an innovation school leader, I recognized the power that it's incredibly motivating to be empowered as a school leader to make the decisions that you feel are best for your kids and community and staff. And it's what inspires me to do my best work every day. I think the other thing that is so important is just, James touched on this idea of safety and how important it is for kids to feel safe when they come to school every day. It's the same for adults. You need to feel safe when you come to work, and you need to feel safe in your relationships with your superiors and those who report to you. And innovation and school level empowerment allows for that to happen. And so I think that, to me, it's not necessarily the tangible. It is the tangibles when it comes to being an innovation school in terms of making decisions around the use of time and resources and staffing and curriculum. Those are all very important aspects of being an innovation school, but it's also the intangibles that people don't speak to often that I think are also really important and that I've enjoyed here in the district.
Thanks.
Thanks. The second question was regarding innovation zone.
Yes.
Sure. So I think that, as Alex touched on previously, because we enjoy and we see the power in what we've experienced with innovation within Denver Public Schools as an innovation school, we see the opportunity for additional power and hopefully additional improved outcomes for our students through being in the zone. As Alex mentioned, the next logical step for us is one of flexibilities around governance. We have the flexibilities currently with budget and curriculum and staffing and time. The next logical step in our progression would be around governance and in feeling the opportunity to leverage that again to better serve students, staff, and community is really what we're aspiring to with the creation of an innovation zone.
Great, thanks. And why is that additional governance innovation you feel like key for supporting your students better?
Sure. So I think for my own situation, it's just the idea that having the opportunity to evolve in my role as a school leader, to assume more decision-making authority, to have the opportunity to have, with us having 2 campuses, to assert my role as an executive principal in working with an independent board that's part of a 501c3 that reports to Denver Public Schools, it would be even more empowering than what I currently experience.
Great, thanks. Sure. And Scott, I'm going to go to you next on, you don't have innovation status as far as I know. You're not in the zone as far as I know, right? But you're getting great results for the kids in your building. Just give us a flavor, I guess, of the choices you get to make at the school level or don't get to make. And is there anything you wish you had more control over as a principal? And would it ever make sense for your school to pursue additional autonomy? Or why or why not?
Yeah, so up to this point, I have not felt as a traditional high school the need to become an innovative school. And I think a lot of that has to do with the supports that I get from the district that come from my instructional superintendent. So in that relationship, I feel like I'm given a lot of trust and autonomy to say no to things and to say yes to other things. But I imagine like if I had an experience like Kurt, I would be more motivated to want that, right? And so for me, it's about the experience that I've had in not feeling like constrained in regards to the curriculum I'm using or the structures that I'm using at my school. Things that I wish that I had more control over, and I know that within Denver Public Schools, like there's conversations around like how do we get to more of like that student-based budgeting, and I think it exists like within the innovation zones, but it's around how do I make sure that I can hire the highest quality people onto my staff. So for example, like I sit on a campus that is a shared campus with Strive Excel, a charter school, and we have a great relationship as a shared campus. But the reality is they can find someone who has a really great background in a profession that my kids are really interested in and need skills to be developed, and they can go hire that person. And I can't, because I have to hire individuals who have certain qualifications in certain areas, which, yes, I believe that everyone needs to be trained and have proper supports, but it is a constraint for me to go out to get the very, very best talent for my students. I also think as it relates to working in a district where I appreciate like how our district has lots of different flexibilities with things and supports. The reality is though, I have some support partners that I don't need. I have individuals in my building who are just as strong or stronger than someone who's at the district, who I am essentially paying for without paying for them, right? Because I'm not seeing that money, and the district's working to get to a system where you can opt into those things. I think we need to expedite that though, because I would love to have more flexibility to say like, hey, I really need my literacy support partner, but I don't really need my math support partner, either because of who that support partner is or because of who I have in my building, because ultimately then I'm able to bring those dollars back into my building. I also, in my previous experience, I worked for Teach for America here in Colorado for 4 years and did lots of hiring and HR things on that end. And I think one thing that, again, on the budget side, that to give me flexibility is, as a traditional high school, I pay on average salaries. So every one of my teachers costs $70,000, no matter what. So in some cases, I'm getting a deal, right? But in lots of cases, I'm not really. And the reality from my perspective is that I get additional funds from my English language learners, which is great. I get additional funds through title money. But in some weird, twisted way, that money is coming to me at North, and it's just going to schools like East or DSA, who are paying it the same average salary that I am of $70,000 for a teacher. And so when I was at Teach for America, everyone was on actual salaries, right? You had a real budget. I don't necessarily feel like I have a real budget. And yes, there's processes that I can go through to become an innovation school or to move towards like an innovation zone. But the amount of work that I have to do to get to that, for me at this point, doesn't like outweigh that. And so I think I would just share that as to like why we haven't, but then also some of the things that I'd like flexibility with more than I currently have around the funding piece and around the staffing piece specifically. But I think the reason why I haven't moved forward with looking into innovation more seriously is because I've been granted from my instructional superintendent the freedoms that I've needed to an extent.
And is that about a specific person? In this case, your instructional superintendent? Like, do you worry that if that person, left the district or you're a different instructional superintendent, that might look different or
I mean,
would impact your ability?
I think partly. I mean, I've had great instructional superintendents, and I know that my instructional superintendent I'm to have next year too is awesome, and that I know it's going to continue based off experiences with her. But I also know, because of colleagues who are in this room who I know and colleagues who I interact with, that hasn't always been the case. And for whatever reason, I think it gets back to what Kurt was talking about around that trust piece, right? And to an extent, like I had a freak out moment Monday night when I couldn't sleep with SATs happening on Tuesday, right? Here I am, the principal of a large high school, then I have all my assistant principals and all my senior team leads and all my teachers who ultimately impact my kids every day, and yet the proof point of how my school is doing is based off this one test, that's the SAT, that I'm removed from, right? And so you can get pushed into the sense of like, well, I have to have more control, right? I have to make sure that the right things are happening, but it totally gets back to that trust, which comes through having the right people on your staff. So the flexibilities around the staffing and the hiring become important.
Great, thanks. And Brandi, I'm going to turn to you next. You are about to open a new school for a charter management organization with the history of opening highly successful schools. And as you probably know, many of the most impressive charters have evolved from a single school with a lot of autonomy to now more systems of schools that are much more centrally managed. So I just would love to hear sort of how involved, I guess, have you personally been in the design of your new school versus what was already determined as the kind of DSST model?
Yeah, so I am founding a school. No pressure there for coming this fall. And I think it's been interesting. I think there's been a little bit of a balance and a tension between everything that you've heard on this panel. Because DSST has been successful, there's like the desire to replicate the model, right? But there's also the fact that there's a lot of variables that play into having a successful school, and it also matters where that school is and what the community is like and the history and what's happened in that school. So then that creates the space that you do need to have autonomy to flex and move. And I think we've struck a good balance so far. I'm really happy with the balance. I do get a lot of say in what we get to do and how we get to do it, and I get to bring a ton of ideas, and a lot of those ideas, to be honest with you, are different than what you might see at another DSST campus, and it's based in my community and what needs to happen in my community. There are some other pieces that will stay the same, right? Some of the things that we know have worked at DSST will definitely continue, and that hasn't necessarily been forced upon me. I think it's the way that DSST onboards new leaders. So they have a program that's called a school director and training program, and I spent my first year at DSST learning from the successful models within DSST. So I worked at 3 different middle schools to learn and to build up whatever my growth areas were. They put me with the highest performing school director that had that strength so I could learn from them. And even though DSST sort of has the same look and feel, if you go into a DSST school, you kind of know you're in a DSST school, but the cultures within those schools and even the leadership teams were very different. So I got to learn from them, but really pull what I wanted to and what I thought was great about those schools and really learn, hey, actually, I think we should do it differently at our Noel campus because maybe it didn't work the best at a particular campus. So I feel like, I don't think we have the perfect balance, but I do feel like it's a very balanced approach in terms of my school design plan is designed by me with coaching and support from my coach would be equivalent to an instructional superintendent at DPS. So there are some pieces that are like right for kids, and the way that we do things at DSST will continue, but Noel will look and feel a lot different, I feel like, because that's what our community needs.
Thanks, yeah. And do you anticipate when the school is up and running and operational, that balance will shift at all, or do you think it'll be similar? And I guess a related question is, would there be anything you want to change about where decision-making lies at that point? And it's hard to say because you're not running the school yet, so I'm asking you to think about what it might feel like in the future, but.
I would say that the most important thing to me as a school director is to have the flexibility to be able to respond to the data and to the reality that I'm seeing. So I don't want to have my hands tied to say, oh, well, this is the DSST way, so you have to do it. If my data is saying this and my kids and my community is telling me this, then we're moving in that direction. And so as long as I feel like I have the space to do that, and right now I do, then I feel supported in that way. I will say, though, at DSST, there are some schools that have sort of gotten away from sort of the DSST model, and that hasn't necessarily gone so well in some areas, and so some of our schools are now going sort of back to basics, and so some of those pieces that are foundational to DSST, I definitely want to keep and like double down on those. But as long as I'm able to be responsive to data, so if something isn't working, I'm not going to continue to do that because that's sort of in the DSST model, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah. And you mentioned the community a few times as you were thinking about this. Just curious, what role has the community been playing sort of now to help you shape? Because it sounds like that really depends a lot on what the ultimate sort of vision for the school looks like, and then what role will they play kind of once it's up and running?
Yeah, I think the community piece is huge, particularly in the community where my school is located in far northeast Denver. There's just been a lot that has happened in that particular community, and community voice was something that was pillar for me in founding a school. So we have a community advocacy committee that meets every other month to really say, like, I want you to help us design the school. This is not something I want to just do to the community. I want community voice and insight into that. We've also had kids we also have another campus in that same neighborhood, our DSST Green Valley Ranch campus, help design an element of our school as well. So we have the community voice, parents, and just community members that have been a part of that process. We actually just met last week to really codify how we're going to continue to engage the community throughout the year, how we're going to have the community be in our campus and a part of our school, and how we're going to have our students connect with the community as well. That has probably been one of the funnest parts of this process, is just having that voice and to get those ideas that are different than anything that I could have come up with on my own or with folks within DSST. That's been really critical. I think it's also critical to have that voice to create a sense of trust with the community that you're working in and serving and supporting, and that we're doing this together.
That's great, thanks. And Christine, you are not a school leader, but you're up here anyway, because you're supporting lots of aspiring school leaders, right? And I think James Cryan talked about this a little bit in the last panel, but I think you're trying to push on, an appetite for different kinds of school models, different kinds of school leaders, and just fast forward, I guess, to, you founded it 2 years ago, but fast forward to today, I guess, what have you kind of learned about that landscape since you started? And I guess, what about the current system makes it hard to test new school models to identify different kinds of leaders? Like, why'd you see this need kind of come about for Moonshot?
Yeah, so I tried to actively get myself off this panel and tried to get many of our fellows who are actually in the audience, if you guys just give people a wave so they know who you are, because you're way better at having this conversation. Thank you. Man, in 2 years, what I think is actually really interesting, probably one of the most interesting things is when I started this organization and I was asking folks to refer people to us, they said, I don't know any leaders, particularly leaders of color, who want to open a school. And I really wanted to challenge that notion that we couldn't find folks locally who wanted to do this work. And I think part of what we think is only folks who come to us, who come to the table, are the folks who should open. And I come from the belief that we actually haven't activated enough of our leaders in this community to say, you've grown up in these communities. What is it that you know your students and families want? And can we give you the access and the resources and the capital to make that happen in a way that we actually haven't been able to do yet? And so what I think is really interesting, thanks. I think what's really interesting is we did start 2 years ago. We just started our fellowship this past year, and that's because a lot of that was for me to build deeper relationships with people in this community that don't often get to sit in these rooms and say, who is it in your community, or is that you that wants to lead? And then we try to give them a whole bunch of supports around leadership development. They're not ready out of the gate. And then opportunities to design schools alongside communities. So a lot of what Brandi talks about, we equip them with tools to do that, to engage students and families in their models. And then 3, say to them, right, like, what's the right pathway for you to do that? In Denver, it might not be a new charter school. Our fellows don't feel a ton of ego around saying, like, it has to be my school with my name on it. They're just saying, I want to change the learning experience for kids. Whether that's within a new school, whether that's redesigning a school, whether that's a micro school, whether that's working with an existing school leader just to say, like, can I provide a program or an after school program? It doesn't really matter, and we don't actively tell them to choose any sort of pathway. We definitely tell them about different pathways, but we say, like, what is it that your learning model can do for kids? What's the diversity we can add to the models that are already existing here in Denver? And how can we support you to do that? So everything from building a community, because it's really hard to do that alone here, to providing people really personalized supports. I mean, it's all of those things, and there are so many people in this room, too. I mean, part of this is just being connected to a lot of people who have a ton of expertise and who are really invested in them, and so many of you are in this room who have sat with us in workshops or at our meet and greet on Monday, and our fellows can't do this work without you, and that is something that we really care about, is that this, whatever they're building is built alongside folks who are in this room and folks who aren't in this room and the kids they're trying to serve.
Yeah, and what kind of supports do you think they will need because I mean, the student, population is declining, as we heard about in the last panel. They sound like they might not need to open their own school, but they're going to end up somewhere. So what kind of supports do you think that they need, and how do you balance that tension? DPS has a really strong portfolio office and really has a high bar around student achievement, which is great, but you're trying to do stuff, push innovation too. So how do you sort of strike that balance, and what does that look like in terms of supports and creating those opportunities for them?
Yeah.
To actually launch them, right, to do this work?
I think some of the supports that I think are really obvious, especially as they start thinking about opening, is really truly access to affordable facilities is a huge issue. I think that's one that I think has been talked about a lot. I think another thing that's very real for our school founders is we are not a full-time program. We work with folks nights and weekends because we don't have enough money to pay people residencies, and that's a real problem. We have folks who are parents who have full-time jobs that are trying to also open a school and be in our fellowship. I mean, it's just a lot to put on people. I think our fellows are also, obviously, they're educators of color, so they also oftentimes carry an additional load in school, that they're not just trying to perform, make sure their students perform academically, but they are also oftentimes the social and emotional supports for a lot of students of color, even if they're not in their classrooms. And so just the level of fatigue that I think they feel by having to do this part-time and carry the load that they have in school, I think it's like any other, I mean, we're like every other nonprofit, like we need more resources to give people an opportunity to do this work full time. And until we do that, I actually think we'll see more of the same. And I think a lot of us know if we see more of the same here, the gap continues to widen. It is not that folks in this room aren't doing amazing work, but I think if we're actually trying to close that gap, I think we need to have a different set of leaders who are equipped to be able to do this work in a way that's sustainable, because everyone in this room has said, right, it could take 2 years till 2020, or it could take 30. And regardless, right, we have to find a way to not burn out. And we are pretty much going at a clip that's, it's not gonna work. I worry about our fellows burning out even in a year or two of being in our fellowship. So, man, resources, support from you all, facilities, I mean, everything that these school founders and school leaders have talked about, our fellows will face as well. And on top of that, right, have the additional challenges oftentimes of being people of color or being women, which oftentimes adds a whole nother dimension to the work.
Thanks. Before I kick it back to the audience for your great questions, I saw some heads nodding up here on the panel. Are there any panelists here who, from what other folks said on the panel, resonated with them, or any comments or things anybody else wanted to say before I kick it back over to the audience?
I'll just jump in on how we're developing leaders, both in the classroom as teachers and then also at the building level. We have to be really intentional with how we are developing our people, and that we aren't waiting for people to come to us, and that we're reaching out very specifically to say, like, hey, we think that we have the talent here, and to increase the diversity amongst what's happening within education. I had this really, it shouldn't have taken me this long, but I was down at the Colorado Music Educator Association conference in January getting an award, and I looked out at hundreds of people, and all I saw was like a sea of white people, right? That's extremely concerning to me as it relates to like education and the perspectives that we have, and we have to really like dig in. I'm also a part of the high school redesign with Colorado Education Initiative, and when I looked out to that group of leaders, it again was vast majority. I think maybe the person of color was on my staff, and that's why they interviewed her. But like, that's not okay. And so we have to, as a collective group here, really make sure that we're developing all of our people and all of our leaders, and that we are reaching out to say, like, hey, like, we believe in you and we need you, because a lot of times individuals who are coming from the backgrounds of the kids that we're working with haven't had society reach out to them to say, like, hey, we want you and we need you. Instead, they've gotten a lot of implicit messages that have said otherwise.
One thing I think is important to add on to that conversation when we talk about autonomy for school leaders is it's a very fine line that we need to balance. And I'm thinking specifically about the role of what you would call a principal coach or an instructional superintendent, because it's one thing to say, oh, you have all the autonomy in the world, go do you, and then we cross our fingers and close our eyes and hope that they build an amazing school. I think that's the wrong direction to go. So I think there's a balance between autonomy and support and coaching and developing your principals at a really high level. And that's one of the things that I've been really blessed to experience at DSST is just the people development. And it's not just at the school level, we think about that with our teachers as well. But any school director, any school leader or principal has growth areas and areas of strength. And how are we coaching principals not just to understand data themselves, but how are we coaching them on being leaders in their schools to coach teachers how to use data well? Does that make sense? So the balance between, yes, I want to have autonomy, I want to have flexibility to do what I need to do, but I am supported in so many ways to make sure that I can do my job at a high level. And so I think it's dangerous, or could be dangerous, if we think that it's just about putting people in a position and giving them the reins to go, because I've seen some school leaders or people in leadership positions who aren't ready, and that's not to say that you shouldn't be in the position, but how are we supporting them and making sure that they're successful along the way? So I just wanted to name that because I think that's an important tension and balance in making sure that we get that recipe right.
Kurt, you've had more autonomy than most, traditional district schools because of innovation status, and about to get even more. Just given what Brandi's saying, how have you learned how to use autonomy smartly, or have the support to be able to make good decisions?
Sure. No, she's exactly right. It's a balance. I think I've been fortunate to have good guidance from some from some strong instructional superintendents and some great thought partners just on my staff and from community organizations. And so, that's helped bring along my development as a school leader. I would concur that just handing anyone a lot of autonomy and the power to run a school is a dangerous thing, and that there need to be checks and balances, and that you have to have support structures in place as well as strong coaching, and obviously the ability to trust but also verify a leader's performance and decision making. So I think you hit the nail on the head.
Great. Awesome. Any questions from the audience?
Hi, Mark Sass with Teach Plus Colorado. Brandi, you mentioned that you have the autonomy to do the work within your building. Does that autonomy seep down to the practitioners in the classroom, one? And two, does the governance structure that you and Kurt enjoy, does it allow for this? Does it embrace this? Does it encourage that development of those leaders within the building?
I'll start with the second question and with the first. Yes, I do think, I think the essence of charter schools is that we have more autonomy to do things and to experiment with things. So I do think it affords that more so. And I think I would encourage that regardless of your governance model to be thinking about ways that we can help school leaders be more flexible and able to respond. For example, a mandate about one particular thing may not be what needs to happen in rooms 207 and 208. So I need to have the flexibility to give my teachers in 207 and 208 what they need, and it might not be what we think the district sort of mandate is. There might be some teachers who need that, so give me that, but give me the flexibility to be responsive to the needs in my building, right? So then to answer your first question, does it trickle down to the teachers? I think for me, that's actually really important for hiring teachers and retaining teachers, because part of education, it's a pretty creative process, and you want people to buy into what they're doing, and quite frankly, people buy into what they help build. So I don't think it's acceptable, and it's not part of our model to say, here is the lesson that you will teach, or the curriculum that you will teach it this way, verbatim. But I do think it's important, if you have a new teacher who hasn't taught before, that having something available for them to use, but make it your own. Bring in other articles, who the students are in your classroom. So I think it's a balance. So we do have a lot of things that are successful. So for example, we will take, if one of our writing teachers had the best writing achievement of kids in the network, we want to look at his or her plans and say, what did you do here to get such amazing results? How did you get kids to write at such a high level? That's very impressive. But what we want to be careful to do is to not say, you all will do all these things. And I think there's a balance depending upon where teachers are. So I think we try to differentiate the needs based on the needs of our teachers. So some we say, hey, we want you to start with this. And once you show that you can sort of work with that, then get creative, build those pieces. We have master teachers who were great, let's talk about how we can push you to the next level in this particular area. So for me, that's actually really important. I want my teachers to have a sense of voice and ownership and creativity, but at the same time, results are really important. Our job is to make sure our kids are successful at really high levels. So balancing those two. Thank you for the question.
Sorry, quick question. Name is Wisdom. So first, I think lots of people talked about student voice, community voice. And I think about this quote, what got us here will not get us there. And what will not get us there is a lack of power. There's a group that's actually saying we're not interested in voice, we're interested in student power, community power. I think there's no better place to start actually than far northeast. That's actually the perfect example of what we're talking about. So the question is, what are systems that you all are, as school leaders or incubator or future school leaders, putting in place to ensure the generation of community power and not the continuation of mobilizing voice? That's a lot there.
I can start with that, and I appreciate that quote so much because I've been at North for 5 years now, and North was a turnaround school, and we've come a long way. But if we were doing what we did 5 years ago today, we would not continue on the path that we need to. And one thing that initially was at North was a lot of top-down approach that brought things back together. But now we really need that student voice and that student power. And I think Ariel's in this room. Like when Ariel was at North, like she was the only person talking about student voice or power in any capacity. And that was great for those kids. But also like planted in me that had to expand. And so some of the things that we're doing at North is we have we're a restorative practice school, and we have a restorative practice class where students in this class, they review things that happen on the discipline side at North High School. And so not only do they have voice in talking about policy, they have power in making decisions around how we execute following through with the school expectations when a student doesn't necessarily do what they need to be doing. And our student leadership and our student council that I meet with regularly, not to just hear their voice, but to have them execute on things. And I think a perfect example of that was how our walkout played out at North last month. That was entirely student-led, and they did everything. I helped to guide them, but that was all them, and that is going to be an experience that has power for them moving forward. And I think on the community level, it's about not just saying that you have community meetings or bringing people in, but actually having them and actually following up and actually having those in the community know that they are a part of the process. And so it's important for me at North that North is a community school and is a community center, and that we're actively working to make sure that those individuals not only have that voice but that power.
Sure, I'll jump in. Really great question, Wisdom, and a great name to go with it. So this has actually been, I think this is a growth area for pretty much all schools that I've ever been in. And it's something I'm really excited about to do a little bit differently at Noel, and to continue to push the needle in this area. So the traditional models of like school leadership are typically like student council, right? Like we have a student council. We have student council at DSST, and it's typically like you have a 3.5 and up. Those are the leaders in your school. Well, I actually look at leadership very differently. There are a lot of leaders and students that demonstrate leadership competencies and interests that don't have a 3.5 GPA, to be quite honest with you. So what other venues and opportunities do they have to shape our school and what we're doing? And I think founding a school, one of the things that I've been talking to our incoming sixth graders about is I want you to help us build this school. This is not Dr. Chin's school. This is our school, and it's what we want to be. Like we're going to be excellent in whatever we do. I'm going to make sure that we do that, but I want you to help and create the legacy that is DSST Middle School at Noel campus. So that's been really exciting. One way we've already started with student voice with 0 students is pulling from we have an entrepreneurship class at our Green Valley Ranch campus, and there was a group of about 12 kiddos and asked them to come in and help us like design our school. And so I literally said, here's your pot of money. It wasn't a lot. It's like $2,000. Have at it. I didn't give them any parameters. I didn't say, here's what I'm thinking, or you have to fit within this box. And they came out, they toured the school, they asked for the blueprints of the schools, and it was the best, most amazing part of, like one of the highlights of founding this school as we plan in our year 0. The other piece of that is making sure that we have real conversations that go beyond the sort of curriculum that we're going to be tackling, but that the lived experiences of the kids in our building, they're very real, and they sort of mirror what's happening in the community. Any of you can turn on NPR or turn on the news and you see the level of divisiveness that is happening in our community, and that impacts our kids. And so opening and creating the space to not only have those conversations, but to give the students to know that they actually do have the power to make a difference in their community, and then to have real conversations about what is power, who has the power in our communities, why is that, and what are we going to do about it, right? What are you in the 6th grade, what are you going to do about that? and creating the space for that. So I think what's missing in a lot of schools is the space to do that. I think we think of school leadership in a very traditional model, like a student senate type thing, or a student government where only certain kids with a certain GPA have access. I plan to sort of blow that model up at our Noel campus and provide lots of different opportunities for different types of leadership that is not just about talking about, but it is about talking, because I don't think students have enough voice as is. So I think it's both a voice conversation as well as a power to execute and to build plans. Like, what are you going to do? And some of this, we got some great ideas in our community advocacy committee around this as well. So I'm happy to share and even get any thoughts that you have to push it even further. So thanks for that great question.
Thanks.
Yeah, please.
Quickly.
Is that good?
Quickly.
I know, Brett's like. I think the question of power is so important. I think all of us, and I'm not only talking about white people in this room, we have to be okay and comfortable with being really fearful and uncomfortable that, like, we don't get to dictate what happens. And losing that control, whether it's in a classroom or a school at a system level, is scary. And I think we need to figure out how we become okay with that. Some of the work we do, which again, a lot of you here are involved with, is Talk to Action. We talk a lot about redefining power and influence. We talk about what we have to do as leaders to potentially step aside. And I think Wisdom, you are an excellent example of saying, I'm going to build a community design team to design my school. I am going to be the facilitator of that experience, but I'm not going to bring a plan to you and ask you if you like it. I'm actually going to bring you together twice a month or more to talk about what it is that you want your school to be. And that is an example that I want all of our fellows to be, because unless we do that, and unless we change those types of leaders or get those leaders in positions, we perpetuate the same thing over and over again. So Wisdom, thank you for that question, and thank you for everything that you've done with us.
Yeah, I think Happy, you're.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes, thank you. Happy Haynes, DPS board. A lot of us have talked about the challenge of increasing the number of teachers, educators, leaders of color. And everyone, I think, in this room agrees that we need to go there. But we are so far from what I think all of us envision. So, and if we think of schools as a unit of change, like where the hiring, where the retention policies, where that really should rest or reside, I want to go back to the question of the previous panel, which is, what is holding us back? And if you had the magic wand, what is it that, you know, what would be that tool for a breakthrough on this topic? Because we all talk about it, and I haven't seen any school or any system anywhere that has been able to reflect what we all say we believe, which is that our educators and our staff and our leaders should reflect the communities that they serve.
And I was going to do a lightning round question, but that exact question around unbounded magic wand, what would you change? So I know Happy asked, maybe we can get on the line here and just get some thoughts from folks.
It's such a complicated, so, there's so many pieces into it, right? Like implicit biases play into, there's so many layers. What I will say across the board is I haven't seen us pursue it with the level of relentlessness that we are about student achievement. I just haven't seen it anywhere, to be quite honest with you. And I think we need to get really relentless about it. Like, if you're serious about this, why is it not at the same level that we do everything else? Why is it not a part of our core model? Why is it not the number one thing that we're going after? And I remember even in one of the things for our Noel campus is we have to have a diverse staff. I mean, look at the kids that we serve. That is so important, not just for our kids, but for us as a staff as well, to be the model of the vision that we have in the world. And so I remember I look for it. Like, I look for it in places that are like, I'm in back alleys, I'm at the coffee shop, I'm like, hey, do you know so-and-so? What about your sister, cousin? And so I think sometimes we try to do it within this box of like, oh, they have to have this and they have to have that, and here are the requirements for this. And we start to create additional barriers that are really unnecessary, right? So even in looking for the dean for our campus, there's a person at our Green Valley Ranch campus who I've hired since, who has potential, but he doesn't actually meet the requirements that are on the paper. Like, here's what a dean needs. They need to have 3 years of experience in teaching, and he doesn't meet that. And I frankly didn't care whether he met it or not, because I saw the potential in him, and the importance of having a diverse staff trumped whatever the sort of criteria was for me. And so I fought for it, and I got him, and it's gonna be great. And so now I have to like be relentless about coaching him, because I'm not gonna put him in a position where he's not gonna be successful, right? So I have to create the space to coach him, but I do think, I just see it, like, we talk a good game about it, but we don't prioritize it at the level that we do other things. That's the biggest thing that I've seen. And then we also let these other small things that don't really matter. What's the difference between 1 year of teaching experience and 3? Really, right? Like, does that even matter, right? And so that could have been a barrier. If I hadn't seen him and like plucked him out, he would have still been in the same position that he was in and not elevated as a leader at DSST.
I'm looking at Abby's timer. That says 37 seconds for 3 of us. So,
But we're also going to have time over lunch to continue the conversation
There
in
we
our
go.
roundtables. So appreciate that, though, Christine.
yeah,
Thank you.
I'll be quick. I do think it's fear of losing control. I think we have to be ready to ask ourselves the really hard questions of what are the biases in our practices and our own mindsets. Are we really fighting for racial justice, or are we not? And I think if we're not willing to look at ourselves personally and say, do I uphold things that uphold racism in my school, in my system as a leader? I actually think that's a really important question for all of us to ask ourselves if we're to move forward differently.
Kurt, you want to do the magic wand question? And it could be,
I'll defer to Scott.
okay, perfect.
So I'll go real quick, but this one hits me like really close recently, and it's because when I was at Teach for America, in order for us to move forward with interviewing or hiring any position, we had to have a diverse candidate pool. It was a requirement. That is not a requirement in Denver Public Schools, and so if I were to wave the magic wand, it would be to intentionally have a diverse candidate pool. And I was so angry, I still am, because I got called from my HR rep yesterday, actually, because I got a complaint filed against me from someone in my school through the union for my hiring practices, because I had somebody point blank ask me, they said, was this diversity candidate pool thing that you're doing, is this a district thing or is this your thing? I was like, this is my thing because it's really important to me. And then they went to the district, and what came back was like, you only want to hire people who are of color. And I'm like, I want to hire the best person. The best person. It has nothing to do with that. And there's so much education that has to happen with individuals like within our buildings, and I'm still so angry that this person, like, that they're on a journey and I'm on a journey. We're all on a journey, but that they interpreted like what I'm trying to do in my building in terms of the diversity of my candidate pools and the intentionality that we have. But that's what I would say is the transparency. So when I worked at Teach for America, we knew what the backgrounds of all of our candidates were. When I look at teachers in our system, I have no idea. I have no clue. And so it's hard to be intentional. And so what we've done is now all of our candidates who apply, they have to then submit a video. So then we can like get that perspective from them as well. So we're trying on our end to do some of these innovative things as a school being a unit of change. But it would, to what Brandi said, we got to be really intentional with it.
Kurt, happy to broaden the question to any magic wand to make 30 seconds. If you make one big change
30 seconds.
to positively impact DPS students,
Sure.
what would it be? What's your lever?
I'll address Happy's question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
So, two things just real quick. If you haven't read the Upshot article that was published in the New York Times a couple weeks ago regarding the outcomes for Black American boys, you have to read it. I think it speaks to the importance of Happy's question and why we need especially adult men of color in our schools. Secondly, I would encourage you to listen to Revisionist History, Malcolm Gladwell's podcast on Brown versus Board of Education. There were black educators in this country decades ago. There were teachers of color in this country decades ago, and that was destroyed as a consequence of Brown versus Board of Education, interestingly enough, but I would encourage you to listen to that podcast as well. This is a numbers game. We need to make the profession more appealing to more people, and especially people of color. there just aren't enough folks who desire to work in schools anymore for a variety of reasons, and that has to change if we're going to address this issue. So my magic wand would create a concerted effort on the part of states and institutions of higher education to work on this collaboratively along with our communities to encourage folks to consider working in this field. I think that Teach for America does a fantastic job of that, but I feel like despite their efforts, it's still not enough. And so I guess it would be expanding the efforts that are in place to broaden the candidate pool. We've had 22 teaching positions posted since November at McAuliffe. I've had 2 candidates of color in 5 months for 22 jobs. So it's very disheartening.
Thank you. Sorry to cut the conversation short. If you could join me in thanking our panelists, we'll have more time over lunch.